Derbyshire. Well, welcome to another Black History conversation. Today we've got Leslie with us again, Leslie Evans, and she's going to be telling us about the son of last week's subject. So last week we found out about Edward Pennant. This week we're going to find out about John and also his son Richard. So it's great. So we've got also with us Dr. Vivian Crawford, who's industriously getting his notepad out, and Simon Faringo. So Simon, as ever, we're grateful for you for your support. I'm just going to just go through our sort of get started formalities. Okay then, so we've got oh dear, I've done this several times now and I must remember to stop it. So hang on a minute, folks. Let's just get the this right. Okay then. So it's the 26th of September. Gosh, time's going by, and we're in season 16, so that's where we are at the moment. All right, so Learning Links International is the organisation that's kept all this together for so many sessions now. I think this is number 158, possibly. Anyway, don't hold me to that, but thanks to Simon Faringo for doing all the techie things. He records it. We've also need to be thanking our colleague Elliot from the States, who's putting together our new website. Now, I organise and pull things together for the programme, sometimes efficiently, sometimes not. And still, we've got apologies from Garrick, but hopefully he'll be back on stream next week. So, Black History Conversations acknowledges the injustice of the actions taken by the British and the other European countries that invaded and took possession of the islands of the Caribbean Sea, as well as the countries in the continents of North and South America. So I'm not chuckling about that. These were really hard times. I'm chuckling about the fact that I've got your pictures on my screen and I couldn't read the words. In addition, we also recognise the exploitation of the great continents of Africa, Asia, and Australia, and many parts of the world in the centuries of colonialisation and ongoing exploitation. We acknowledge that this resulted in the destruction and destabilisation of so many nations, peoples, and cultures, with so many people enslaved. Okay, well, we'll just move ourselves on to this is I've had quite a lot of information about Malik Al-Nasir's new book, so look out for it. Searching for My Slave Roots. It's getting some real rave reviews, and it's certainly something that's going to be of interest as he explored his family history and then moved back and back. I think to discover that in Guyana he's related to both enslaved people and plantation owners. So really interesting write-ups. And he's doing several talks around the country at the moment. Also, we've got another notification from the Runnymede Trust. Last week we were talking about something, and this is an interesting one again because it's history on loop, the sustained impact of school exclusions on the Black communities. And this is the last bit of information I'm going to share because there's quite a lot online to read about this. So if you want to follow that up, then have a good look. It's easy enough to find on the Runnymede website, but there's some really alarming information, for example, about the underdiagnosis of SEND, as we call it now, among pupils from minoritized ethnic groups, particularly black boys, who are all too often perceived as disruptive rather than needing support. Now, is this a surprise to a lot of us? No, it isn't. But it's good that yet another report's come out and that's been going to be shared widely. Now, we've got another presentation now, which is going to be the one that that Leslie's going to be talking to, but I'm just going to make a start with it. So let's see, and I'll tell you about something I've been doing this week, and you'll probably wonder what on earth I've been up to. Right, here we are then. So let's share the screen and get the next presentation up and running. Dear, there's pictures jumping around all over my screen. Right, okay then. So it's the life and times of John Pennant, and Leslie was telling me that she felt really pleased that she'd managed to find the date of birth of John Pennant. So he was born.
Richard.
Oh, of Richard, right, okay. So John Pennant was born in 1702 and he died in 1782. So he was 80 years old. He was born in Jamaica. He was one of the eldest of Edward's sons. Gifford Pennant had been his grandfather. He wouldn't have known Gifford Pennant. And then his son was born in 1737. Now, it's important to know that date because that was when John and his wife moved to the UK from Jamaica, where they'd been born and brought up. So we're also going to hear a little bit about Richard, who is often referred to as Richard the Improver. And his dates are from 1737 to 1808. So that's what the main focus of this session is going to be about. But I just started to have a little look. I thought I needed to be a bit better informed than I felt I was. So I looked on the Centre for the Study of the Legacies of British Slavery, and there's quite a lot of information there about the Pennant family. So you can look that up. And in particular, his will, John Pennant's will, was is presented there. So that's quite easy to read, and that's interesting. So and just to mention here that when his son Richard Pennant inherited his father's estates, he also inherited the estates that had been handed down to his two uncles. So that was quite an interesting thing to look at. And then I plunged into the joys of what does AI say about John Pennant. So I'm just going to flash these past because they've got some interesting comments. Sugar was booming during his lifetime, driven by demand in Britain and Europe, but this wealth came at a human cost. The plantations depended on the labour of enslaved Africans brought through the brutal Atlantic slave trade. Sometimes AI doesn't mince its words. Um, Okay, so what his role was in colonial um, uh, Jamaica was also highlighted as the connection with the wealth, and we'll be hearing about the slate quarries, and then also to think about what John Pennant's legacy was in Jamaica. So I did a little research on that, and then realised that his estates passed to his heir Richard. And the descendants of the Pennant family have never lived permanently again in Jamaica. So, just to go through the timeline very quickly, just go back to say that from 1655 it was, but 1670 the Pennant family started to establish its first estates in Clarendon, Jamaica, during the early expansion of sugar cultivation. And then during the 1700s, John Pennant, who we will be talking about, inherited and acquired more plantations in Clarendon and consolidated the Pennant family holdings in the fertile plains of Clarendon. Parts of Clarendon are very hilly as well, but there's certainly plenty of fertile ground. And then the 1720s to 40s expansion of the sugar production. And you're going to hear so much more about this from Leslie. So 1734, John married the Jamaican heiress Benella Hodges, and it was together that they travelled. They'd only been married, I think, 3 years then before Richard was born. And they, after those 3 years, they were travelling back to the UK. So in the mid 1700s, John Pennant emerged as one of the leading planters in Clarendon, part of the Jamaican plantocracy, and his estates were amongst the most profitable in the parish. Interestingly, in Clarendon, we're looking to start the Clarendon Historical Society so that we can share all this information with people. And then in 1760, Tacky's War, the Slave Rebellion, broke out in Jamaica. Now, that wasn't based in Clarendon, but it wasn't too far away, and the unrest spread. And obviously, like other planters, John Pennant would have strengthened the state security and would have been affected by the fear of revolt among the enslaved workforce. So it was not easy times for the white people, and it was certainly not easy times for the enslaved Africans. So let's the profits from the Clarendon estates channel back to Britain, and John oversees this transatlantic wealth transfer. So after he died in 1782, Richard Pennant took on, and his wealth laid the foundation for Richard Pennant, who later becomes the first Baron Penrhyn and starts developing the area around where Penrhyn Castle is now. He didn't build Penrhyn Castle. There was already a castle there. He would have done some improvement work to it, I think, at that stage. And then after 1782, the estates continued under Pennant ownership. And just to say, they were managed by absentee landlords, and Leslie's now going to explain a good bit about that. And the village of Pennants in Clarendon retains his family name to the present time. So that's now over to Leslie's research findings. So thank you, Leslie, for letting me just share that to show you where my little bit of research is joining in with your wealth of research. So over to you then.
So, as you've just heard from Liz, in 1736, John became the heir to Edward's plantation, extensive lands, and increasingly we get to know more about them because John and Richard after him were absentee landlords, and they depended entirely on their attorneys and their overseers to send back information to Britain for John to make his decisions, for John to suggest, as he did in a lot of occasions, suggested improvements he wanted to his work. Now, I just want to just cover this little information I've put on the screen here, because the Pennant family are often criticised for representing the enslaved as chattels in their accounts book. And the reason for that is the way it was required by law in Jamaica. As you can see, it was as a result of a book produced by John Meyer called Bookkeeping Methodized, based on the original double entry system that Luca Pacioli had instigated in Europe. And during the course of this conversation, I'm afraid there will be words on the screen which we would not use today, like Negroes. And what we have to remember is that largely what was going on was reflected, as we would call today, in a racist society where Negroes were not always referred to in complimentary terms. But in everything that we are looking at today, I'm afraid that word Negro will come up because I'm quoting directly from documents of the day. But, as I already explained, this was simply the standard practice of the day. It wasn't something that the planters invented. It definitely wasn't something that our Pennant family invented. They were just simply following the requirements of Jamaican bookkeeping.
Oops. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to be looking at this account book for Denby 1772 in quite some detail, because it reveals to us quite a lot about what was going on the plantation. Now, John came into possession of the plantations in 1736. And he had already started to purchase land, only small amounts. The major part of his land purchases began in about the 1750s. And he added to the existing plantations another 4,000 acres of land. More about that later. In 1744, in our archives, from which all of this information was taken, there is a partial fragment of documents. There's also some very sketchy information from 1748. But between 1772 and 1832, there is a wealth of information in the archives. And I'm just going to dip into this one as an example.
And this is Bangor Archives, isn't
Bangor
it?
Archives,
Bangor
yes.
University Archives, the Pennant collection.
So, in a nutshell, this is what these account books can tell us. And it is really a wealth of information if you take the time to actually look at it and analyse it. So, let's look at the first entry. Here we've got the purchase of some enslaved workers. We know he got them from Wright and Lucy, who were merchants in Kingston. And if you look online, Wright and Lucy, Ford and Pratt, and Williams and Thomas Bond, later mentioned, they're all mentioned in Google, and they can tell you exactly where they were and what their business was. So let's look at the first entry for William and Lucy. So we've got the purchase of 6 new men, and then 2 new boys and 8 new girls. Have a look at the price of those. The boys and the girls are at £57 each, and the men are at £50 each. Now that tells us that those men were not the best quality he could have bought. They would have cost him much more than that. But remember, this is a time when enslaved workers are really, really only not readily available. They're much more expensive if you want a quality man. And John was always writing to his attorney that he wanted to have first pick when it came to purchasing enslaved workers. However, that priority went to the really big enslaved working plantations, like Peter Beckford's. I'm afraid John would not have had first pick, and that's reflected in this total here. So, moving on to the new boys and the new girls. They are not boys and girls as we would know them today. Those are teenagers. The boys often referred to as men boys or man boys. And that is the average price for a teenage child who is coming up to be of an age to be trained out in the fields. Gone past their grass boy and grass girl age limit, and now ready to be put to work in the fields. We can see how much it costs to clothe them. Very cheap. 3 lots of clothing there, all about coming out at the same time. But some of them probably would have been better quality than others. However, that's what it cost to clothe an enslaved worker in those days. Here we have John Shickle mentioned for the first time. He was one of the attorneys that worked for the estates, and he did a lot of things. He, as the attorney for an absentee landlord, would have done a lot of running around. He not only would have been looking after the accounts, he would have been keeping a supervisory eye on the plantation to the best of his ability. But tasks like buying suits of clothes and attending a trial for an enslaved worker later on, as we can see further down there, would have all come within the remit of his day. We see there that the enslaved worker in question was called Stepney, and he was a runaway, basically. And he was kept in jail for a while. The price of 10 shillings tells us that. And this was the way of encouraging an enslaved worker who was a runaway to realize how much better off he was on the plantation than being in jail. He wouldn't have been redeemed fairly quickly because a trial would have happened. And that trial would have been in the form of 3 or 4 of the plantation owners getting together and deciding what his punishment would be. In earlier days, he might well have got away more lightly than going to jail because at that time, as we know, the enslaved workers were in short supply and you couldn't really spare an enslaved worker off your plantation by sending him to jail. But things are getting a little easier in that respect, so he's gone off to jail just so that he can realise how well off he is on the plantation, where he has relative freedom. He can go and talk to his mates, he can be fed, clothed, etc., etc.
Oops.
On the bottom of this is another piece of information.
All right. I think it's on the next slide. Can I just go ahead to the next slide?
Yep.
No? It's not what you wanted. All right, but just go back to
Yes,
this
it's fine.
one.
It's fine. We'll move on to this one. Next one, please, Liz.
Okay, right. Leslie's got a lot of research in here.
Okay. The accounts book, apart from including all those sorts of sundry items that were necessary, also gives us a really clear idea of how much wages were paid to the white workers on the plantation. This goes over to 2 pages and it includes information for 25 of the white workers. We can see at the top the most expensive items are the overseers. And John Bell is being paid £170. That's his year's salary. And David Ross only gets £28.16 and sixpence because he's only been partially employed in the previous year. And the reason for that is outlined in the next 3 lines. Because we have John Thompson, a late overseer, that means he died in action, as it were, who got £80 plus. And then we have 2 temporary overseers getting paid a small amount before David Ross was employed. The overseer, as you probably know, his job was one of the most important on the plantation, and that was to literally oversee all the workers on the plantation. He did the roll call at the beginning of the day. He sent the enslaved workers off to their various pieces to start work. And then he, throughout the day, popped in to see what they were doing to make sure that they were working hard. And if they weren't, there was usually a bit of lash work that took place. Assisting him are 4 bookkeepers at this time. Now, bookkeeper does not tell you the whole job that these people had to do. Yes, they had to keep the day-to-day accounts and keep them accurately, but part of their job was also to assist the overseer to make sure that the estate was running smoothly and also to supervise the enslaved workers. We can see again William Hughes, he was a former bookkeeper at the plant, and then we've got 2 late bookkeepers. And as you can see, the word late has popped up 3 times already in 1772. That means that through the course of the year, their they have been deceased. And that is just a symptom of how the white workforce really didn't have the stamina to maintain longevity. I'm assuming they probably would have been on the estate for a couple of years, but we don't really have the records to confirm that. So down at the bottom, we have John Crow, who's a driver. That's not a chaise driver or a wagon driver. The driver is the man in the field who encourages the workers under the overseer to continue working and to work at a fast rate and faster if he requires them to. He gets paid the princely sum of £182 plus for his efforts.
So that's the name of a slave driver.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we also have all of these people who are necessary workers on a plantation. The surveyor. Now, what would he have been surveying? When I look at later records, I see that he was probably a surveyor on the roads because new roads were being constructed, not only to and from the various plantations as they were being formed, but major roads were being formed to the new towns that were being built and were popping up across the island. So he would have been on piecework, he would have been called into the plantation and just done a few days' work here and there. The distiller, of course, that was a really important job. He was the man responsible for making sure that the product of all the hard work of the enslaved workers was timed to be producing the best sugar and the best rum. A big responsibility. Incidentally, you can see the odd half p popping in here. That's how crucial it was. Every penny and half p counted and had to be accounted for. We've got 3 millwrights, one of them obviously full term, that's John Young, and 2 assisted him, whether they were called in at peak crop time to assist is probably the case. Then we've got a blacksmith and a coopersmith on a yearly salary of in excess of £100. And then a carpenter, his yearly salary, £80. Then we've got these 3 following. A year's salary, £46, 7 and 6. We don't know what for. William Carrick and Edward Johnson on a year's salary of £30. That tells me that these are indentured servants. They're servants who have signed up to work on the plantation for 3 to 4 years at a basic salary of £30 a year. So, we don't know what salary John Burroughs was on, but he's clearly been there longer than a year. William's been there longer than a year and had no money, and neither has Edward Johnson, and he's been there 4 years. He's had no money, is being paid this year. Their lives on the plantation would have run on credit, and here they're being paid some money to pay off that credit. We've got John Stewart, a penkeeper and farrier, and finally Andrew Hebron, who's at the kraal, which is a pen where guinea grass was produced to feed the animals. All of those essential workers on the plantation. Now, deducting the gentlemen who are deceased, that gives us 19 white workers who worked to offset this deficiency law requirement that I told you about last week. There had to be a ratio of 1 to 30 workers. Otherwise, the deficiency law requirement kicked in and the plantation owner had to pay a fine. Sometimes it was cheaper to do so. This same account book is giving us a pretty good idea of what came under the title of additional expenses. We don't know what George Roxted got paid his money for, nor Mary Rowan. I suspect they were traders. Mary clearly wouldn't have been a worker. So we got this requirement for hogsheads and lime. That's for packaging up the sugar. More white lime, freight and provisions from Cork. That's basically foodstuff that Captain Thomas Wyatt bought all the way from Cork. We don't know where the lumber came from. 107 bushels of corn. That was food for the enslaved workers. And then this huge list from William and Thomas of supplies, £921 worth of supplies. John Shickle, off on another job, produced calves and cows, rum. Interesting. They bought in rum at the same time as making it. Mill horses, coffee, corn and steers. And finally, William Smalling, more steers required. However, they could make an income by hiring out the enslaved workers. So here is the offset. Not a lot of money, indeed, not a lot of money at all, but of particular note is the way that it's worked out. We can see that Catherine Hale hired 12 Negroes for 257 working days, but commuted at 1 and 6pence a day by deducting blank days and Sundays. Again, every penny on the account had to be accounted for. Every explanation had to go to John so that he could understand what he was paying for. Here we have an account of the crops that were actually produced. On the left-hand side, we've got Clarendon. On the right-hand side, we've got Westmoreland. As you can see, Westmoreland was not producing anywhere near the same amount that Clarendon did. Some years are missing. Now, that's not to say there was no stock or no crops produced. What that means is, unfortunately, the records for those years are either not available or they're in such a badly deteriorated state that you can't produce a reliable amount of money or information from them. Particularly interesting to note that at Clarendon, that's Denbigh, Coates Bend, Burnt Savannah and Penryn Pen, of the 12,000 acres available, only 300 are capable of production. The rest of the land is taken up with pens, woodland, ruinant land, which is basically produces firewood for the plantations. 300 acres of land out of 12,000 is not a huge amount. Just imagine what could have been produced by the plantation if more had been put into production. John and Richard had a lot to say about that. It's interesting when you look at the figures for 1782 and 1785. It's not a significant amount of difference in the value of the crop, but it's a significant difference in how much was bought in. And that tells you, and is a good example of the fluctuating rate of sugar production and its value. The price of sugar and rum went up and down all the time. So there are other years there which are comparable, but as you can see, as the century goes on, they're increasing the crop and therefore increasing its value. It's a wealthy crop, produces a lot to offset all those expenses we've looked at. But don't forget, there's also shipping and insurance to be deducted off this money at all. And those became increasing concerns to John and Richard as the years went by. If we have a look at Pennant, which is also part of the Clarendon properties here, only 154 acres of that 1,300 acres is good land. And Cupis itself was entirely run as a pasture. Now, all of this information is in this account book.
It's interesting to see Penryn Pen
Mm,
mentioned there. I've not seen that before.
yeah. Now, this is information that I have compiled to show us where and what energy was expended to produce those figures. This is an estate record of the enslaved workers. If you just glance down through it quickly, you can see that it's a fairly stable workforce. The numbers for each plantation don't go up and down very much, and when they do, there's a reason for it. Unfortunately, we don't have a complete set of records for 1778, but the figures are pretty equal, with one or two exceptions. Now, if you see down the Denby columns in 1806, there's a huge reduction in the workforce because in 1801, at Old Works, there'd been 189, New Works 193. But around about 1806, the works were combined into one work with only 265 enslaved workers. Reading across at the same time, the statistics for the other plantations are roughly about the same, with the exception of Cupis. And I'm suspecting that some of the excess workers from the Denby plantation have moved over to the Cupis because that's gone up by 50 workers. So, as I said, there's usually a good explanation for why the figures are as they are. There's a big drop in 1807, 161, but there were big floods in the Clarendon area in that year. Don't quite know why Cupis would have been so affected, but however, it looks as if some workers have been withdrawn back to Denby because Denby was badly affected, and that's gone back up to 356.
Mm.
If you look at 1808, again, some of the figures have dropped apart from Thomas River. I'm not sure, but I think that some of the workers from Denby have gone over to Pennant because for 1808, those are the first figures we get for those plantations, for Pennant's plantation itself. It didn't seem to exist before 1808. Unlike Kings Valley, which did, but no statistics surviving before 1782-83. Now, if you look at those figures there, you might be justified in thinking that the plantations were regulated staff-wise quite well. However, I got a shock when I looked at a new document that I found, which came out in 1781. And it was a document which looked at the condition of the enslaved workers on all of the plantations. Now, this is the year before John died. And as you can see, it reveals some pretty horrifying statistics. Although initially it doesn't look too bad on the front of the elderly members of the plantations, with varying statistics, as you can see. One of the plantations has an alarming amount of workers who are deemed to be weak because they're either drop a school or fall into any of the other categories. Then we've got this category of workers called indifferent. Now, they are the workers who are really expressing their discontent at being enslaved and what we would call today working to rule. They just turned up, did their job, dragged their feet, and that's how they became classed as indifferent. We've got the grass gang. That's those teenage girls and boys who are helping around the plantation, not yet ready to be fully fledged workers. And then you've got the children population. But when you look at the total of the workers who are not deemed to be able or fit enough to work at any of the harder labour jobs, that's an alarming statistic. For Denby, just for one example, 51% of its workforce is not working at full capacity. If you look at Thomas River, 60% is not working at full capacity. And when John and Richard must have looked at this, they must have been fairly alarmed. Again, thinking about the minority of the land that's being produced, looking at his workforce, he must have realised that that was also a significant factor in producing what had already been produced. I decided to have a scout around and see what statistics were actually available for me to use. And it turned out that when I looked at the decreases, now those are the statistics that tell me what an enslaved worker has died of. 24% of the deaths between 1772 and 1808, which is on the which is the age range of the statistics I just gave you, 24% of the enslaved workers died of old age. The next large category is those who died of an unknown diagnosis. As you can see, we're going down. Contagious diseases, child deaths, a cautionary word about that statistic because many children weren't even registered on the increases list because they were thought not to survive, so they weren't actually put on any lists anywhere, so that the statistics didn't look too bad. It's not surprising to see so many respiratory deaths because all of those come from working in cold, wet, damp environments, as do fevers, the stomach complaints, pretty much to be expected. Accidents involving wagons. Several accidents where a wagon has just killed somebody outright or steers have gored. And moving down the list, 3 enslaved workers hanged themselves as a protest. And down we go. A couple of girls died in childbirth. Mortification, that's an odd one. I couldn't really find an apt description for that, but basically what it means is you've got too old and your body's just given up on you. Eating dirt, that was deemed to be a way to get minerals, but you could eat too much of it apparently. One burnt for practicing obeah. One died after lapping, lockjaw, transported. That was an interesting one. As if it wasn't bad enough to be an enslaved worker, if you did something bad enough, you were separated from your family and transported off to another island, usually to a Portuguese or Spanish island, where they were treated far worse, apparently, than on the English plantations. Manumised, that's set free and sent to another estate. So that's an analysis of the decreases. When I did an analysis of the increases, that's the children's births, the shocking statistic is that on an average, there were only 2 new births a year of children who survived. So again, John and Richard both had a great deal to say about that to their overseers and the attorneys. And here's a few examples of conversations that went backwards and forwards. As I said, John Schickel had oversight of the plantation, he had oversight of the accounts, and he was also an attorney. So based on what I've just said, you can see what John wanted to do fairly early on in the time that he was taking control of the plantations. Changes of use, more cane pieces. He's reporting on getting 30 shillings for King's Valley for land that had been destroyed by the rebels. Now, I popped that in there because that's a really interesting piece of local history that doesn't appear in any of the history books that I've found, which is another reason for scrutinising these account books so carefully. That will obviously have had implications on the crop at that estate. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell me the exact year it was there. And because I can't find that in any other record, I can't equate it with the sugar statistic. So later on, when John was presumably had a good handle on what he was supposed to be doing, he's decided to convert Cave River to a pen because he wants to have cattle, not only to supply the estates, but also to feed the Negroes instead of salt beef from Ireland. John had a very special view of his workers that is often reflected in the letters that go backwards and forwards to the attorneys. So here, he doesn't want them to have salt beef, he wants them to have fresh beef. Looking back down through, these are instructions that he's giving. He wants more men because he doesn't want to hurt the ones that are already there by overworking them. He's clear that he doesn't want his young boys and girls put into service for more than 2 years. And he also wants to use apprentices in trades to keep up the large number of tradespeople. And please note, he says to the attorney, if putting these boys to trades will make a deficiency, we better buy some more. Down here at the bottom, we've just got a little anecdote from the records, which I thought was quite charming. So moving on into Richard's letters to the attorneys, he gives us a little bit of information and then he gives an instruction. So, okay, Jamaica's going to be under attack, we think. Just don't buy any more Negroes than you need to. However, we're soon going to have peace. It'll probably lower the price of sugar. Can we cope with that? No. Okay, so we need to be producing something else. All these little bits of information tell us that the plantation needs to be more ambitious, really. Here he's giving instructions about what we have to consider from a man writing from aboard is his view of how his plantation should be run. He wants to make sure that his plantation is running efficiently He wants to make sure he's told them this is exactly what he wants. He wants them to buy.
So this is Richard Pennant,
Mm,
who had not experienced, he might have just been born in Jamaica before his parents travelled across the Atlantic. But so he had no real life experience of
nope.
what Jamaica was like. And yet his extensive collection of letters goes into considerable detail. And also the maps you mentioned earlier, the surveyors, are an extensive and
Mm-hmm.
wonderful collection of maps at Bangor Archives. And we'll say a little bit about the archives at the end of this session
Mm,
because it's been the source of so much fantastic information.
yeah, it has been. So
Mm.
as you can see, what he wants them to do is to buy cattle to pull the plough to save the Negroes' work. And in addition to that, he's going to send out a ploughman. And the hope of it is it will save the Negroes' work. In another letter, just make the sugar as fine as possible because on the duty is the same and it'll save us carriage. And if you can't sell the sugar, sell it in Jamaica. Make the hogsheads larger to avoid tax. That's shrewd. You had to pay tax on a hogshead. So, okay, let's make it bigger. Let's pay less tax.
Oh, amazing.
Now, clearly at this time, the slate quarry's going. The other branch of their financial work.
Empire.
Yes. So he's saying, you know, if you want slates, I can give them to you. He's always questioning what could be done. Is the land suitable for cotton? Should coats be continued? And then he's quite critical. All those Negroes only producing 40 to 50 hogsheads of sugar and a small quantity of rum. Is it going to be more profitable to establish a pen at the foothills at the Moco Hills? Good question, Richard. But it's a question he rightly needed to make to his attorneys. Here's another suggestion. We'll disband the pieces closer to closer. We'll use them, but on the other hand, the remainder, we'll just withdraw the Negroes and turn it into a fattening pasture. And here's the really big one. Now he's referring to Westmoreland here. That's Kings Valley. I'm really tired of laying out money on an estate. 6 years. No estate can sustain losses over 6 years and not be feeling the pinch. Again, 1787. Yeah, I agree with you. We need to make improvements, and we can make improvements so that the sugar works makes more. But the pen isn't making a profit. I'm going to discontinue it. Now, this next question puzzled me because if Richard's been receiving all the accounts books that I've had access to, he should know the answer to this question. How many workers are there in Kings Valley? And how many hogsheads should 70 acres of plants produce in a middling year? Because his overseer should have been reporting that to him. However, sometimes overseers were not all they were cracked up to be. After John Schickel died, Richard began correspondence with the new overseer, R.W. Fearon, Roland Williams Fearon. Now, he had his own plantation, so he should have known how things went. he's trying to justify himself here in this first statement. He, as well as being an overseer, is also an attorney. And he's appointed a new overseer and is trying to assure Richard that everything is there. Everything there will go as planned. Now, constantly, both John and Richard are saying in all of their correspondence, I want my Negroes treated well. I do not want you to abuse them. We won't get the best work out of them. And here Fearon is saying that there are new principles in place now, that a good planter takes care of their workers, and they are certainly the Negroes on our estates. He's introducing a little regime on his own plantation where midwives are paid for every mother who delivers a child. And this I thought was cute. The mother is paid 3 and 4pence to buy a little fowl for the child's stock in life. These are all direct quotes from letters that have gone backwards and forwards to Richard. It engenders regard and affection for their master. Now, to me, that smacks a little bit of buttering up. Richard is really concerned because he knows this Bill of Abolition is going to go through. And he thinks it's a dangerous experiment. I hope it will have no bad effect on our Negroes, so they will remain quiet, because that's what a plantation owner wants to know. His enslaved workers are quiet and happy and working well. However, runaways can be sold off. Fearon justifies keeping them because the overseer from a couple of years previously has been unnecessarily brutal and has been dismissed. And now that he's been dismissed, some of the runaways have come back, so they have been forgiven. Richard writes back to him, I hope to have your services for as long as my properties do well. However, in a later letter, little increase in slaves and many deaths of cattle. I hope it's not through carelessness. So what he's hearing from Fearon, who has direct supervision of the workings of the plantation, does not begin to tally with what he's hearing from other attorneys who are getting concerned about him. Fearon is saying, oh yes, your lordship, I thoroughly agree. You need to have a dominant power in this country. He recommends his brother. In a later letter, we're plagued by clerks, and I query the expense of keeping them on. That is the kind of information that was being sent forwards and backwards, Jamaica to England, England to Jamaica, to sustain all of these works, business, information needed for John and Richard to make decisions. When Richard Pennant died, January 1808, it took Fearon till July to write to George Hay Dawkins Pennant, who became the new owner, his condolences regarding Richard's death. Now, I'm going to end on a final point, which some of the previous might have some relationship to. And that's the fact that in 1810, the Pennant estate took R.W. Fearon to court on a matter of bookkeeping because he'd put in his accounts in the time between the death of Richard and getting in contact with George Hay Dawkins, he put in an account for his services based on the gross value of the crop when it wasn't the custom. His wages, as it were based on the net profits of the account, and it was a substantial figure. And they took him to court and they won. However, there was very little chance of them getting the money because not only was he a member of the House of Assembly, but he had substantial debts. So in this case, R.W. Fearon did not do a good service for Richard, not as good a service as John Schickel had done for John, which really underlines that being an absentee landlord required you to have a really good finger on the pulse of the plantations, every aspect of work for you to become and remain a successful plantation owner.
Well, thank you very much indeed there, Leslie. That's just amazing. A whole lot of detail there. And what's really good to report is that Bangor University Archives have now got a lot of this information online so that it can be researched and explored by people anywhere around the world. It's available free. So we'll maybe do something a little bit more about that. So Vivian, over to you. Have you got any queries or questions or
Oh
comments?
boy.
A lot there, a lot
It
there.
was, yes, yes. I want to thank Leslie most sincerely. And what she said is so new. It's so, yes, you heard it before, but to hear it in this presentation, I am just still in shock. How another human being to justify greed and enrichment could classify their brothers and sisters as half animal and half human and subject them to that. Children were born and they're born into enslavement, and it didn't matter. And this information is priceless. I am sure the University of the West Indies and the um, institutions elsewhere would want to benefit from this. They told me, I remember Professor Vereen Shepherd, Dr. Devon Dick, when they were doing research in England about enslavement, is £200 a page, that sort of money they had to pay. In other words, it was more discouraging them not to do the research. And here it is that today, Leslie has access to that source and sharing all that with us. Incredible.
Some of the documents take 2 or 3 readings, Vivian, for you to really take on board what they're actually telling you. That's why I took so much time to analyze these,
Yes, you're
because it's not
terrific.
just accounts, it's a whole history.
My God of grace.
Mm.
Oh,
So what's amazing with this is that Leslie set about actually um, finding the names of the enslaved workers on the Pennant's plantations. And we've got a project called Fiwi Life, Our Stories, which Leslie's been working on. And while she's been exploring, going through the records, you've obviously taken, a lot more interest in other aspects so that we can understand the lives of the enslaved workers. For these 3 sessions, and exceptionally, we've focused on the 3 men who were resident in Jamaica and developed the plantation legacy of the Pennant family. That was Gifford Pennant, who came to Jamaica either as a part of Cromwell's invading force, or maybe he was encouraged to go to Jamaica shortly afterwards to take over plantation ownership and development. Then his son Edward, who was just a small boy when his father Gifford died, and then Edward developed more plantations, got more plantations allocated to him, etc. And then his son John and John's two brothers, he left his he split the plantations between them, and then they came back together again under Richard Pennant. That's right, isn't it?
When Edward died, he left the plantation to the three brothers,
Yeah.
Samuel, Henry, and Jem.
Yeah.
Samuel went off to England, and became the Lord Mayor, of course.
Yeah, Lord Mayor.
Henry was already in England when when his father died, because he was at university at Cambridge.
Oh,
So
right.
he didn't come back. So that left everything to John,
Yeah.
but in charge, as it were.
Yes.
So when Samuel died without any children, and Henry did too, everything passed back
To
to
John.
John, who
Right.
passed it on
To Richard.
to Richard.
Yeah.
Did you notice how money, the power of money, because money came with positions. Lord Mayor,
Yeah.
money came with positions.
Yeah. As I said last week, they were constantly making their money work for them, but also making their money attract heiresses, basically, because John married an heiress, and so did Richard. And Richard's wife was instrumental. The marriage was instrumental in bringing the plantation in Wales back to a whole. It had been split in half to one side of the family and half sold outside. And it was only when Richard married that the estate came back together again as a whole. So it was all based on money.
You know, Liz said on this program, the structure of the British society, the nobility looked down on the natives, the peasantry, and the peasantry looked up to them. And money was the deciding factor in all this. By the way, you spoke about a name, Archibald MacLean.
Yeah.
Now, Archibald, Archbold, that's a name that is popular in Jamaica. In fact, the presenter on the television here is Archibald. He's Archibald Gordon. So I'm just saying the derivative of the name has changed. And here in Jamaica, we have a place, I don't think Liz has been there, called Anoto Bay in St. Mary.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, it wasn't the keeper of the collections at the National Library, who is from Anoto Bay, told me it was never Anoto Bay. Anoto, you know, is a fruit that is used for coloring in tropical countries. And it was used to color cheese. It was never Anoto Bay. It was another bay. And if you say another bay 9 times as quickly as you can, you'll end up getting the R out. And it's easier to call T than call R. So there's a place in Jamaica, in Kingston, called Red Gal Ring, which would be Red Girl Ring. Red Gal Ring. Now, that's on your way to Stony Hill in Kingston. Now, it was never Red Gal Ring. It was where the redcoats met on a Friday night. So it was Red Gathering. If you say Red Gathering 9 times as quickly as you can, you'll get Red Gathering.
Yeah. There's a
But
whole other lecture in place names in Jamaica.
ah, place names. Yes, and the
Yeah.
derivatives.
Yeah.
I,
Runaway Bay, for instance,
yes.
where someone ran away from.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
As Liz said, when you go through this absolute wealth of information that is held in Bangor University archives, you have to sift through the catalogue and find what you think is the right document that you're looking at.
Oh my
9
God.
times out of 10, you may be right. Then you'll get a document which seems to have no relevance at all to what you are dealing with. But oh my word, the information in that document you wouldn't have found had you not looked at it. And it becomes all a part of the big picture of this story that we're telling. And I'm always find out. Last week, for instance, as Liz alluded to at the beginning, I found out the actual date of John Pennant's birth. No, sorry, Richard Pennant's birth, because it's always got a question mark at the beginning of it.
Okay.
So John and Vanella decided to go back to England right at the beginning of the ownership of the plantation. So his father died in 1736, and very quickly, John decided he wasn't going to be staying in Jamaica. Now, when I spoke to the family historian about why that decision had been made, he made references to a rebellion. Now, I couldn't find anything at all about a rebellion in that time, but it's very relevant that Benella, John's wife, was pregnant at that time.
Oh, Richard.
Richard was, according to the family historian, born on a journey on the ship coming back
To England?
to England. And I kind of feel that we've hit the nail right on the head with that, because what I discovered, and again, just as I've said, you're looking at a document and the relevance of it doesn't actually hit you until you see it against another piece of information.
Okay, yes, that's right. To
I've got
juxtapose it.
I've got two documents. One is dated the 8th of January, 1737, and it says John Pennant of the parish of Clarendon in Jamaica. So that's the 8th of January. I've got another document on the 25th of January, which says John Pennant of the parish of Clarendon, now resident in London. So that tells me if that ship journey happened, it couldn't have been between the 8th of January and the 23rd of January, because
Yeah.
that's long enough. So one of those documents isn't right. Now, which one is more likely to be right? I think is the one that says that John is now resident in London.
Yeah.
And I think probably the other document was in the process of being written up and not finalized before he left. And that means the journey happened January, December. I think that Richard was born January 1837 on that basis. Sorry, 1737 on that basis. Two documents read 9 months apart. You put them together, and the obvious is there that you've puddled about for ages.
I would want one day, if it is at all possible, Leslie, to unlace, to get a presentation on colonialism, the legacy of colonialism. Because on the one hand, it's enslavement for America, the Caribbean. What? It wasn't enslavement in India, was it? No.
No.
It was oppression.
Depression, yes. That's a whole new story.
All right.
And the
Hang
cutting
on a
of the
minute. Hang on a
African
minute,
people.
Vivian. We've
Yeah.
got Simon joined us. I think
Oh
Simon's
yes.
going to tell us that we need to wrap up.
Simon
No,
Julian.
I'm not going to say that. I'm going to agree with Vivian because I was talking about this at a meeting yesterday on cotton and sustainability, and I raised, as I often do, the need to decolonize cotton and textiles because
Yes.
the entire industry is shaped by slavery and colonialism. Businesses are where they are because people were exploited in the Caribbean, in India, in West Africa. And so at some point, the textile industry needs to do reparations. And we use the example of the floods in Pakistan, which the cost of rebuilding, well, of building the infrastructure that's not there was estimated 3 years ago at about $30 billion. And they don't have that infrastructure because during the colonial era, nobody ever built flood defenses.
Oh my God.
Because all the profit was extracted. And that is a British colonial legacy. And there was no slavery in Pakistan, but there was bonded labor, forced labor. So yeah, I completely agree. We need to look at that. And you were talking as well about those fees to access the documents. Well, part of reparations is that information
We should
should
get,
be
yes,
free to
the information
Jamaica.
should be, yeah.
Yep.
Thank you for that. Yes, that's why you evoked my curiosity.
Yep.
Yes, it's just incredible what's going on.
The good news is that the people who work in the textile industry, so the businesses, they hate the idea of reparations, but the people who work in businesses, the young people, they love it
Yes.
because they know about this now. So
yesterday I said, Simon, that this year marks the 190th anniversary of an Englishman who was an Anglican minister in Jamaica, Mandeville Parish Church, Reverend John True. He was Archdeacon, was venerable. And the thought, sat and wrote all these letters, no computer, no typewriter, and wrote all these letters to England, seeking support for education 190 years ago for the enslaved, 311,000. And I am just saying, in terms of magnanimity, when everybody else was scrambling to get their 20 million worth from the compensation, here was this gentleman doing that. And guess what? He's forgotten as though he had never been. I had a meeting yesterday elsewhere and said that it's sad. We should have a name, some posts. And they said, who is that? What did he do? Because the British gave some grant, £30,000. And in the twinkling of an eye, it was discontinued. No support for education. And it was the churches which came to the rescue. The churches came to the rescue.
There is so much more discussion to go on here, but we're going to wrap this up now because I know Leslie's got to get on for another thing, and Simon.
Wonderful presentation.
From Leslie's lovely
Vivian.
kitchen here, from Simon's home over in
Leslie's kitchen.
and also from your home, Dr. Vivian.
You're going to get roasted breadfruit.
You go and get your roasted breadfruit. I can see the table being set. Right, okay then. Well, Leslie, the last 3 weeks
Leslie, thank you.
absolutely fascinating. We're going to let Leslie have a break for a few weeks now, because we are expecting arrivals in the UK of a delegation from Jamaica, who will be flying next Friday. So I'm not sure what we'll do with Black History Conversations next Friday, but maybe we'll bring these stories of the Pennants together and talk about what the family did when they created.
So there'll be no meeting next week?
I think there will be, yes, but I'm not sure. We may have to be on the train.
Okay. Want to thank Leslie most sincerely.
You're welcome. But
Thank you,
the
Leslie.
thing to say, and the really important thing is, There are new discoveries being made every day in those archives. Next week I might come, or in the future, there might be something different to tell from a different perspective because another document's turned up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's worthwhile us using Black History Conversations to share this information because we feel very strongly that we have this amazing collection which our colleagues from Jamaica will have an opportunity to visit and spend time, which is also being put online. And certainly we can ask
Ellen?
our colleague Ellen if she will speak again. We did have another platform that she was able to speak about the archives, but there have been some developments and changes now, so that would be quite useful. So we keep up to speed. So I think this is an ongoing thread. And Simon, your comments about fabric as well. This has been something that we've looked at in the past, and we can continue with our discussions. So I think whichever way things take us, then thank you very much if you're listening to this at some future date. Yeah, watch this space. Okay, bye for now then. All
Bye,
right.
Vivian.
Thanks
Bye.
very much,
Bye, Simon.
Vivian Crawford.
Bye.